Hey guys, in Anne Lamott's essay Shitty First Drafts, you guys just read about the idea of pre-writing, the kind of writing that we do before we even start worrying about a draft that we're actually going to show to anybody. The sort of draft that is crappy on purpose because we know nobody other than us is ever going to see it. But in addition to that idea, I also wanted to talk a little bit about a bigger idea of the writing process. That is to say, how do we go from the beginning to the end? At some point in any given writing project, we get an assignment. Whether that assignment is coming from a teacher, from a boss, or even from ourselves, we get something that causes us to write. And at the end, we turn something in. Whether, again, to ourselves, to a boss, to a friend, we're publishing this piece of writing in some specific way. So the question to talk about is what happens in between? What is it that we do going from assignment to turning it in? Here's what my students tell me. I do this in class a lot, and I hear the same things over and over. Basically, for most of my students, the writing process looks something like this. They get an assignment, and from that assignment they create a rough draft. They may take that assignment to somebody and ask for feedback. They may share it with their instructor and ask for his or her comments. They may take some time and look at it again later, but from that rough draft, they look over it, they clean some stuff up, and they produce a final draft. And that final draft is what they turn in. There is one variation on this that I also will hear that adds another step. After I get the assignment, I also do some brainstorming. This is really common, and while I think it is not a bad idea, and at least it is a step up from, I think, what most of us often do with assignments, which is write one draft frantically immediately before the due date and then turn it in. This process is a little bit better than that, but it has one major problem. In between the rough draft and the final draft, you really only have one opportunity to make changes to what you've written, which means that in that one step, that one jump between your rough draft and your final, everything that you could possibly think of that you might need to work on has to get taken care of in that one step. And it's hard, I think, for students to visualize another kind of process or to think of even any other way that the writing process could work. If you aren't just doing a rough draft and a final draft, well, how many drafts are you supposed to do? And what's the difference between your first draft and your second draft, or your second draft and your third draft? How do you decide those things? So I'd like to talk about a more powerful option. This is how I approach writing and how most experienced writers I know approach writing. It gives you the ability to produce writing that is better than anything you can do in that one-step process. Here's how it works. Let's start with that same structure that we talked about before. The idea of an assignment leading to brainstorming, leading to a draft, leading to a revision. I don't think there's anything wrong with that idea. The problem with this structure is that it's so linear. Each step leads only to the next step. And as a result, what you turn in is the result of that one step, that one big effort to change everything. Here's another way of thinking about it. Let's take that same structure and turn it into a cycle. Instead of pretending that we only have one shot at things, let's imagine that each draft gives us a chance to revise, and that sometimes that revision might take us back to brainstorming, sometimes it might take us to a new draft, but ultimately it's going to continue in that cycle until it gets to the point where it's something that we're proud of. At some point, absolutely, one of the drafts that we generate is going to be what we ultimately turn in. But how long a paper sits in that cycle is a different question entirely. So now, instead of having one step where I have to think about everything, I can make each revision a small and focused attempt to address a particular issue. So let's say I have a draft. One question I might ask myself at that point in the process is, how's my organization? Maybe I'm worried that my ideas are scattered and that I'm going from idea to idea, or that it's not clear what order my ideas should be in. Well, so I can do a revision focusing only on this question of organization, not really worrying about anything else, just looking at that one issue, because I know that I'm going to have the chance to do this again. So I can clear up that issue without having to worry about others. That revision is then going to be my new draft. I've cleared up the organization issue, and I'm back at square one, focusing on another question. I might realize that there's an idea that I haven't really fully explored and that I'm actually kind of unsure about. Why do I think that? Well, that might cause me to go back and do some more brainstorming. At that point, I can just focus on generating ideas, on explaining this question to myself so that I understand where this opinion comes from, and then I can incorporate those ideas back into a new draft. And here we are again. So now I might ask about my citations, some of those smaller but still important things that maybe aren't huge and fundamental to the paper, but that are still important and need attention. I can go through, look at all of my citations, and make sure that I've got everything the way that it's supposed to be, and generate a new revision. This technique is powerful because it allows you to look at one issue at a time. Is this the best voice to use for my audience? I don't know. We can look at that. By the time we're done, we've got a new draft and that problem is solved. There are more things that we can look at than I could possibly list here, but each step in the process allows us to narrow down the amount of things that we have to do and to make our paper that much stronger. Each time we go through the process, we end up at a more powerful paper. And eventually, once we're satisfied with where we are, we get to the point where our paper is ready to be turned in. It takes a lot more time and effort, absolutely. But it makes for a much stronger paper than you end up with if you just start with that old traditional process. When we do it this way, as a linear process where we're just going from rough draft to final draft, all of those questions have to get answered in this one tiny step. And there's just no way that you're going to address all of these things, plus all of the other things that I couldn't mention, because the amount of stuff that you could possibly want to look at in a piece of writing is infinite. So, as we start working in earnest on our writing this semester, try to keep this process in mind, this idea of writing as a cycle, where we are moving back and forth from draft to revision and brainstorming, where it doesn't matter how far back in the process it seems like we might be going. We know that even if we are starting over with a new draft, even if we have to start doing brainstorming again, we're still moving forward because we're moving toward a stronger paper.